Good afternoon. Welcome to the November monthly policy update. We are just getting started. Glad to have you with us this afternoon. We'll let folks gather in the room for just a moment. All right, I see we are at the top of the hour, so why don't we dive in? Again, if you've just entered, welcome to Independent Sector's monthly policy update. I'm Ben Kirsch. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations here at IS. If you're joining us for the first time on an IS webinar, welcome. We're a diverse membership organization representing nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs, all working to ensure that people living in the United States thrive. As part of our webinar feature, your lines are muted. You're welcome to submit questions at any time through the Q&A function, or we'll pick them up in the chat. If you're having technical difficulties, please email publicpolicy@independentsector.org. Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. It's the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who are still in the area working to reclaim their land and their traditional practices. Also, many of the buildings we inhabit in Washington, D.C. were built by enslaved people. No matter where you're joining us from today, welcome. I'm really glad to have with me my intrepid government relations colleague at IS, Ana Montañez. Wes Coulomb and Heather Mead are trusted partners at Washington Counsel Ernst & Young. I'm not joined today by my immune system for the third MPU in a row. I think I have a cold. Don't worry, I've also had a cold in between all of these individual times. So we'll see if my voice holds out. Thanks again to my small children in daycare and school. So with that, I want to turn it over to a much steadier voice on these issues, Wes Coulomb. Hi, Wes.
Hey, Ben, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll today kind of talk through a little bit about post-election results, kind of where things stand as of today. I think people are kind of following this to the news, but we'll kind of update where things are both the House and the Senate, and then also talk about what the agenda looks like going forward, at least in the short term, end of this year, and happy to speculate about 2023, but that's a little bit far off in the agenda. So let's kind of kick it off and look at we've got a couple of slides for you to run through. Pretty simple, straightforward. I think first talk about the House, and my colleague Heather Mead's with me as well, and have her also share her views. So let's kind of talk about what happened in the elections on the House and the Senate side. First, focusing on the House. So you have the current party ratios: Democrats control 220, 213, 50-50 Senate. I think there was lots of chatter going into the election night about Republicans taking over, winning a substantial number of seats. Obviously, as you see the results thus far, they did not happen. However, the Republicans did finally secure enough to get a majority, 218 recently, and now being called as the new majority for 2023 with 211 seats by Democrats in the House thus far. You look at the kind of what happened on the ground, the various races. The Republicans have thus far flipped 18 D to R seats. With the House, Democrats were able to kind of flip 6 seats for a net gain so far of 11 seats for Republicans to date. We still have about 6 seats outstanding, undecided, counting some votes. I think those are in a handful in California, I think Colorado and Alaska. I think at least three, possibly 4 of those undecided seats are being led at the moment by Republicans. So you could see a couple seats, a couple more seats flipped to Republican side in the next couple of weeks. In Alaska, you have ranked choice voting system there. It's currently held by a Democrat, but you have 2 Republicans behind her. So that could potentially, in the ranked choice system, I think doesn't get counted until next week. could flip to Republicans' control potentially there. So let's kind of set up for the way things are in the House, looking at 2023 in the election thus far. In the Senate, we currently have a 50-50 split. Going into the election night, a lot of folks thought the Republicans would take over a handful of seats, but the Democrats were able to, thus far, defend every. Want to go back one slide, Heather? Go back in the House. Yeah, right there. Heather, do you have a comment on the House races first?
I do have one little comment on the House that I
Okay.
wanted to make. I just thought our you know, I think anyone like me that was in a pool where you had money on the line to guess the outcome of the House might be a little bit interested in what happened. So one of the things that we've seen in the polling coming out of the midterm elections that I thought our crew here might be interested in is sort of what made up that difference, right? So we typically expect in a midterm election for the party of the president to lose substantial numbers of seats. Typically it's by, several dozen seats that they have tended to lose, right? Obama lost over 60 seats, Clinton lost over 50 seats, Trump lost over 40 seats. And so the shift is a lot narrower than most prognosticators had indicated prior to the vote. So I did want to flag for you a couple of the things that we've seen coming out that really made the difference. So one of the things that was interesting was we actually saw higher negativity amongst voters who actually voted. So what the right track, wrong track was actually more negative than usual, with 77%, irrespective of party, saying the US was not moving in the right direction before voting for their candidate of choice. But when it came down to it, the thing that made the sort of difference, it turns out that independents who typically tend to trend more with the right track, wrong track, actually voted for Republicans in much lower margins than in previous midterm elections. Both when Democrats took the House while Trump was in office and when Republicans took the House during the Clinton and Obama administrations, independent voters voted with the Change Party in a ratio of over 50%. In this election, we saw Republicans only gain about 48% of the independent vote, which is really what sort of dampened the margin of change. So while we still saw change given the right track, wrong track numbers as expected, that margin was much more muted because independents actually split their vote in a much more even way between Republicans and Democrats, which really reduced that margin. I thought that was kind of an interesting outcome that that most prognosticators did not expect to see given the polling numbers. And at the time of the vote, I think one of the things that was also kind of overblown leading up to it was the negativity in the media around the president's polling numbers. So it turns out around the time of the vote, his polling numbers were actually pretty similar to his predecessors, which turned out to have less of an implication for the polling numbers, for the actual vote numbers coming out of the midterm election. So just a few little items of note there as we look to see kind of what actually happened. So let's talk about the Senate, Wes.
Yeah, that's good insights, right? And who the candidates were, any difference in some of these races, I think also added to the outcomes as well. So that's good and helpful insight. So, all right, with the House let's kind of talk about the Senate races and what we see there on the next slide, Manuel. So in the Senate, we talked about currently is a 50-50 split. We've been the longest 50-50 split in history in the Senate. Going into the election night, the Democrats had about 23 seats to defend. The Republicans had to defend those number of seats, and Republicans had to defend only about a dozen. So the thinking was they would be able to pick up some of those seats in some of these tough races. So you have on the map here, I think we have about 8 races. We want to kind of highlight some of the ones who folks thought might be, toss-up races and go either way. Potentially some races that the Republicans could pick up potentially in some of these seats, for example, in Nevada, Ohio, and other places. But it looks as of the count, Democrats were able to maintain and hold every single seat they were defending and not lose one of their seats thus far. Republicans lost Pennsylvania, And so that's a flip to the Democrats' side with the retirement of Senator Toomey, and John Fetterman won over Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. So that's a flip there from Republicans to Democrat control. So now we're at 49 going into Georgia. And the question is, what happens in Georgia? Georgia is a state where they have a runoff system. If you don't get 50% of the vote, you go to a runoff. The runoff is scheduled for December 6th with current Senator Warnock versus Herschel Walker as a Republican challenger. So if that race is won by the Democrats, obviously continue control of the Senate by 51-49. If Herschel Walker wins that runoff race, it will be 50-50. But still, Democrats will maintain control of the Senate because you have the vice president that breaks the tie. So Vice President Harris will still be able to break the tie. Democrats maintain control of the Senate going forward, regardless of what happens in the runoff race on December 6th. So that kind of gives a snapshot of kind of where we see Congress next year. So 2023 is going to be clearly divided government. The House controlled by Republicans, Senate controlled by the Democrats. And you think some of these races where influences had an impact. Thinking some comments from Senator McConnell, basically commenting that candidate quality has an impact here. You saw a lot of Trump, push forward candidates in the primaries that were unable to knock off the Democrats in the general elections, and gave the ability to the Democrats to maintain their majority in the Senate. Heather, any other comments you want to make on the Senate races?
No, I think you really hit on the right one there, right? Even in places where, there were good candidates, right? We really saw some of those, fundamental challenges in the race, but really candidate quality was the biggest issue on the table and on the ballot this year. And we sort of saw that play out in places where Republicans might have otherwise had the potential for pickups.
Yep. Okay, good. So that kind of sets us up for 2023 going into next year. Let's kind of talk about a little bit, timeline, what's on the horizon in the short term. Between now, I think at the end of the year, what Congress has left to accomplish. They came back this week, mostly to organize as leadership elections took place in both the House and the Senate this week in various parties. First, let's talk about the House. And so with the Republicans, looking to take control of the House in 2023, had their leadership elections on the Republican side. So Representative McCarthy was nominated by his members to be the Speaker-elect, designee, for 2023. That will not take place, a full vote of the full House on January 3rd to officially put him as Speaker for next Congress. Obviously, that vote was not without controversy. We had some challenges there. The Freedom Caucus, for example, a bunch of conservative Republicans in the House were pushing for and are continuing to push for rules changes in the House before they move forward. But they pushed forward with the leadership elections in the House with McCarthy in the Speaker's spot and Scalise and other members of leadership kind of carrying forward from this Congress into next Congress for the most part. On the Democrat side in the House, those elections are not taking place until November 30th. But as you saw the news today, Speaker Pelosi has announced that she is not going to run again for leadership position next year. In addition to that, Leader Hoyer also announced he would not run for leadership elections next year, and both will retain their seats and stay in the House, at least for the time being, but not in leadership positions. So it kind of gives some new members the ability to move forward and to step up in the House. I think Hakeem Jeffries is one of the leading candidates to be the House Democratic leader, potentially going forward. Congressman Clyburn expected to stay as an assistant to leader position in the Democratic caucus, and so he'll stay around on the House side. Have anything you want to comment on the House elections leadership wise?
Yeah, I think while we may have those folks staying, right, I think that new leadership team is kind of running as a team. And so we don't expect a lot of sort of outside candidates coming in for the House Democratic Caucus, right? So there we have, right, as you mentioned, Hakeem Jeffries, who has been endorsed, right, actively endorsed by Pelosi and by Hoyer as they leave. They have endorsed him along with Catherine Clark in the whip spot and Pete Aguilar from California, the conference spot. And so that they will actually kind of run as a team, and I think have done a lot of the legwork to actually gather substantial support. And I think that the largest potential threat to that was whether or not Hoyer decided to open up that leadership space with Pelosi. And he has actively endorsed Hakeem Jeffries in his note that he released at the same time as the Pelosi speech on the floor today. So that slate, similar to the elections that we saw in the Senate, is fairly well set.
Yeah, yep, good. All right, so on the Senate side, similar setup. The Republicans had their elections, but Democrats are not having their elections until after Thanksgiving. And so on the Republican side, you had Senator McConnell, the current Republican leader, elected again to maintain his position as the leader. Also, not without a little controversy, you saw Senator Rick Scott from Florida, who actually ran the Senate Republican Campaign Committee this year, kind of challenge McConnell for that leadership spot. Other members wanted to delay the elections for that leadership spot, mainly one of the arguments why I'm dissatisfied with McConnell, I think, but also because the runoff election in December 6th is still outstanding. They're not a full complement of members until after that. But I don't think it would have changed the outcome of the vote and changed what would have happened. But I think McConnell wanted to move forward with it right away to get things kind of set, which he did. And so he's set his leadership team with Thune and others down the line are going to retain and maintain their positions in the Senate on the Republican side. Any comments, Heather, on the Democrats, Republican or Democrat leadership in the Senate?
On that, very similar on the Democratic side. We're not expecting a lot of change, right? Leader Schumer is expected to retain, has more than enough votes, right, to retain his position. The one place where we've had some change is Senator Patty Murray is currently the conference secretary. She's indicated that she will take the senior position on appropriations and will serve as the president pro tempore, which is the third in line for the presidency role. That means that she will have to leave her post as conference secretary, which will open that up. The other posts that are open are those on the Republican and on the Democratic side for who wants to lead the charge on the campaign committees into the next election is always an open question. So there will be a little bit of shifting of seats. And of course, along with all of these shifts will come the sort of the top positions for who's in charge of the committees. And so we'll have a little bit of shuffling there in some of the key committees on both the Republican and Democratic side as we move into 2023, but those will not be set until after the leadership elections and very possibly into 2023.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks. All right, so let's kind of talk about, kind of beyond the election campaign issues and leadership, kind of what on legislative front is on the agenda, what may or may not happen between now and the end of the year. Obviously, they do a lame duck session post-election this year, really kind of geared toward the December 16th CR funding expiration date. That's kind of drive, I think, the activity on what they can get done, what they want to get done. Kind of going to go through some of the issues. The big issue on the table is the omnibus appropriations bill. So the question is, do they reach an agreement on a top line number they're trying to get to by tomorrow, at least before they break for the Thanksgiving recess, and then kind of on staff and work on the underlying policy numbers underneath the top line number. If they can reach that agreement, then that might help them get some of the other issues dealt with when they come back in December. If they don't get an omnibus appropriations bill done, then I think a lot of other things may not get done as well, and so there's a chance they could, punt CR into early mid-spring of next year. Usually around end of February, March timeframe is what typically happens when they don't get the omnibus appropriations bill done. But I think, in my view, I think they have a good chance of getting an appropriations package together You have lots of senior leadership in the Senate and the House that are leaving. Senator Leahy, Senator Shelby, for example, two appropriators in the Senate are both retiring, and they want to get something done. And there's also, I think, a motivation from leadership to have the issue taken care of, not have it deal with next year in the House and the Senate. In addition to that, you have what can kind of go along with that or ride with it. I think there's going to be lots of health extenders and some tax extenders as part of that package. I think is the conversation going on with the House and Senate staff about doing that. You have traditional extenders, about 20 to 30 ones that have expired. You have some from 2017 tax bill, some business extenders, the R&D amortization or expensing provision. You have other provisions dealing with bonus depreciation and interest expense deduction for corporations. Then on the Democrat side, they're really pushing for an extension of the child tax credit provisions that were part of the American Rescue Plan, did not get included in their Inflation Reduction Act. They fell out due to Joe Manchin's opposition. And so they're trying to push for that extension again in the child tax credit realm. Now, the issue there is really that one, the policy, and two, the size. I think the child tax credit expansion is about $180 billion if you do the full package, and the business provisions between 30 to $50 billion depending on how long you extend it. So there's a mismatch in size, but I think there is some give and take potentially amongst the Republicans and Democrats on that issue to get a deal there. Then you also have the National Defense Authorization Act that is on the table to get finished. Notwithstanding, Congress Leader McCarthy mentioned they might be able to get it done this year and might want to deal with it next year. I think there is a desire amongst leadership in the Senate and otherwise on the Armed Services Committee in both the House and Senate to actually get the bill done and put it together by the time I leave town end of December. I think they're planning to actually move that bill potentially in the Senate early December if they can get agreement on a package on that. Heather, anything else you want to think about or mention or talk about?
No, that is a pretty good summary. The one thing I'll throw out there is an issue that they have not agreed on yet, but there's a lot of press around whether or not they would do something with the debt limit, Wes.
Yep.
I would say there's a lot of interest, particularly amongst Democrats and maybe a little bit amongst some more moderate Republicans, that they would like this Congress rather than the next Congress to determine whether or not we keep the full faith and credit of the U.S. and raise the debt limit, which isn't likely to hit until third quarter of next year. But there's been some posturing already that it could be used as a political tool. And so there is a little bit of conversation about whether or not they do some crazy kind of procedural moves to try to address it at the end of the year. I'm going to put it at below 50%, but it is the time of the year where they can do all sorts of the crazy things that can come together pretty quickly. So just throwing that out there for a little fun addition.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good comment. I think there's behind the scenes support to get it done and get off the table, even amongst Republicans. But I think that there's but the politics around the debt limit and actually getting the votes could be problematic to actually make it happen. But I think most likely it does not get tucked in there or added to the final bill. But if there's a final bill with lots of things in there that they have the votes for, and they decide to tuck it in there at last minute to see if they can get it done, I think both some Republicans and Democrats would like to see that taken off the table. I don't think McCarthy and the House Republicans would. They want to use that as a leverage point for next year. I think others, view that as a risky gamble and like to get it taken care of before the end of the year.
So
one last. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
So I don't want to stop you if you were getting to this, Wes, Heather. Thank you so much. One thing that many of us in the charitable space are watching really closely is the potential for a tax package of any size to get across the finish line this year. We know a lot of folks are also closely watching appropriations and earmarks therein. I was in 7 Capitol Hill offices yesterday, and I got 7 different answers about whether a tax bill is going to happen this year. And that's why I signed on to the monthly policy update today, to try to get the straight answer about that. What should we be thinking about and watching in terms of a tax package, a retirement piece of that tax package? How should we be thinking about that?
Yeah, good question, Ben. And the way I think about it is Congress operates around a vehicle, right? And the will to get something done and voted on. I think a standalone tax package or a standalone pension bill, for example, or a standalone debt limit extension are hard to see get done. But if there's a big omnibus appropriations bill that both sides have agreed to in the House and Senate on a bipartisan basis, and it has a strong majority of votes, and I think you see that become the vehicle to add other things to it, a tax package, for example, a retirement bill, for example, less likely, but still possible, a debt limit extension, as the vehicle. So it really, in my mind, revolves around a vehicle that's actually has the votes and moving and signed off by both the House and Senate leadership and the president. If that's the case, I think then other things start getting tacked onto it. But you're also run up against the capacity. How big of a package can they bear? At some point, the Christmas tree gets too loaded up and it falls over. And this is the same case here. If they do too much to it, then you start potentially losing votes. And so I think the tax piece, I think the traditional extenders that they've done in the past are a given. If you do, it's the 2017 business provisions, I think there's bipartisan support for that. The question in my mind is how much can they do on the child tax credit if they reach a bipartisan agreement on that? And if they can, something more modest, the Democrats are willing to come down to on a smaller scale that has a little more bipartisan support. I think there is a deal to be had there on the package. And the pension package, I think the pension bill has lots of bipartisan support. There's been a lot of conversation between the House and Senate on the details. It's close to being tied up, a few outstanding issues, but I think there's a good chance that gets resolved and add to the bigger package as well if there's omnibus appropriations bill. So that's kind of how I see it. Heather?
No disagreement from me.
Thank you both. So let me invite folks again to submit questions in the Q&A or in the chat if you have comments to add. While we wait on that, I had another question about the leadership elections. And Heather, maybe this is for you. Some of us have been waiting 20 years for some Democratic leadership drama. And it seems like we might miss out on that. Kidding aside, are there things we should be thinking about with this new leadership team, assuming it is those three, about how they're going to approach, sort of either caucus dynamics or policy as our sector looks to work with them in the new Congress?
Yeah, I think those are the questions that everyone's kind of asking themselves right now, Ben, and I think they're really good questions. And I mean, anyone who's been sort of hanging out with you for those last 15 years while you've been waiting should know that Pelosi would never leave a disorganized caucus. That is her calling card, is caucus organization. And, she has developed this leadership who's been working with her for the past several Congresses. So they have seen how the current caucus formation functions, and so they have a level of experience, right? They've all been holding roles in the current Pelosi leadership team, but they are all very different members than Hoyer and Pelosi and Clyburn. And one of the things that is interesting is we've had a little bit of a shift, right? So Hakeem Jeffries is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, but he is a moderate member. But he will, be able to continue, the role of working with all of the caucuses. He's well respected, but he is a moderate, right? He's not from the left flank. But for that, they have Catherine Clark from Massachusetts, who is much more on the left side of the party and connected, with a lot of the women in the party, has really had a leadership role there. And Pete Aguilar, right, is a really, important voice. Democrats did not perform as well in this election as they had hoped to with the Latino communities. And so that's something that we will expect to see as an area of outreach. He comes from California, so Pelosi, keeping those California ties there in the leadership. Also important to note, she did not resign from Congress, right? She said she is retaining her seat, as is Hoyer. And so they will, I'm sure, feel welcome to add their guidance and perspective as things move forward. But definitely, I would say similar operating styles, but people who will differently. Jeffries is known for listening. He does spend a lot of time listening to his caucus, and so we'll see how that plays out. Starting in the minority is a lot easier than the job that Kevin McCarthy has, which is leading with a small margin. And so he certainly has that to his benefit. Wes, any additions that you would?
No, I'm very qualified to talk about the House Democrats. But I think the point is well taken in the sense that given the majority in the House is very narrow, right? How will they govern both McCarthy and Jeffries, right? Easier to be a minority member in that situation than the majority where, McCarthy will have to come in and get his members to be there and vote. If the Republicans decide to get rid of proxy voting, for example, that Pelosi's had on the books since COVID, he's going to have to then have his members in town, in person to vote. They can't do it by proxy being out of town. And so that with that narrow majority, he's going to have to make sure their attendance is good to get the votes to do it. And he also has some conservative Republicans on the right pushing him against things. And so, does he want to have votes where he has a majority of Republicans and a bunch of Democrats voting for it? He's want to have it all Republicans. So it's a tight dance for him going forward, as we saw Pelosi having to navigate a tight majority.
Thank you both. I appreciate that insight. So now I want to turn to Ana Montañez on the IS staff, who, as our regular listeners know, has been closely tracking a number of nonprofit sector workforce issues for us. Ana was also schlepping all around the Hill yesterday. A lot of high fives exchanged in passing. Ana, what can you tell us about those issues?
Thank you, Ben. So I have an update regarding student debt relief program. So as many of you know, I've been following, hopefully, because there's a lot of back and forward. On Monday, a federal appeals court issued a nationwide injunction temporary barring the Biden administration student loan debt relief program. So this ruling was issued by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis and is the latest in a series of legal challenges that President Joe Biden's plan to cancel up to $20,000 in student debt for millions of Americans. So last Friday, the Biden administration stopped accepting applications for its loan relief program. This came after a federal district judge in Texas struck down the plan. So there's a lot of legal challenges that have come after 6 Republican-led states have argued in a lawsuit that this loan relief program threatens their future tax revenues and that it actually circumvents congressional authority. So the latest things that we've been hearing from the Biden administration is that they're trying to weigh in and trying to see if they're going to extend a pause on student debt payments. If you recall, currently the payments have been paused until December 31st of this year. So we're going to continue monitoring this issue. We know it's very important for a lot of nonprofit employees, and so hopefully we'll have better news in the next days. But it's clearly a legal battle at this point. Next, I want to turn into something that Ben referenced, which is the charitable giving coalition flying. So the coalition held its first in-person fly-in since 2017, and that happened November 15 and 16. So Tuesday and Wednesday. And in this coalition, so the flying actually, the goal of the flying was to tell Congress to renew and expand the expired non-itemized or charitable deduction, which expired, as you recall, at the end of last year. For me, it was a great experience going back to the Hill after 2+ years and walking the halls. Not only that, but it was great to see staffers in person and read their body language and everything. So one of the things that I want to kind of recall, I also got mixed messages, but I want to report that after a lot of the meetings that I got in the Senate, I think that there's consensus that if there is a tax extender package, if there is one of those, this provision could actually, it has good chances of getting included. So if you were not able to participate on the charitable giving flying, I'm going to include a link to an independent sector action alert. So you can actually tell your senator and your representative to support and expand and extend the charitable deduction. So those were the updates that I had, and I'm going to share the link on the chat.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, we need a vehicle to exist, and we need then to get our stuff included in that vehicle, such as life in the charitable sector, where our bills don't go to the floor on their own. And IS has been advocating, kind of on both of those fronts, and we appreciate everyone who has, stood shoulder to shoulder with us. So thank you, Anna, for sharing that in the chat. I want to give folks one last chance for questions, but I also know you've hopefully not spent as much time as we have refreshing your news feeds over the last 11 days.
Then while we're waiting, there's one issue that I failed to mention in the year-end conversation. That is the privacy legislation that has been moving through the House and the Senate on a bipartisan basis. Not moving, but is in House and Senate on a bipartisan basis. As you know, there's a large Privacy Act bill in both the House and the Senate. In the House, it got hung up on an issue dealing with the California state law. Pelosi and the California delegation raised concerns about that. In the Senate, there's bipartisan support for it, but Senator Cantwell, the chair of the Commerce Committee, has raised some issues. So the view is that the larger package is not likely to get done and still going to be stalled. But there's some conversation taking place of doing something more targeted, with privacy for children, that sort of thing. That's on a more narrow and more targeted basis, maybe get done on a bipartisan basis before the end of the year. Not sure if that would be tacked on to the honest appropriations bill, or if it could move by itself. It probably would be tacked on, given they have some issues with the overall package, but we'll see. So that's kind of still in discussions, but not a high probability of getting it all done this year, but something to be mindful to watch as they proceed with their negotiations.
Thank you, Wes. We appreciate you flagging that. Certainly an issue that we have been tracking, and that I know a number of our partners have been working to wrap their heads around. Not something our sector and our advocates work on day in and day out, but a topic that could prove vital. Please stay tuned as we have more information or more opportunities to learn more about that legislative area. We will be sure to let y'all know. With that, I want to thank Wes and Heather and Anna, and most of all of you for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to being in touch. Thanks again.
Thank you.